Chapter 1. The smashed Inkwell. The great hall of Ashbourne Manor lay hushed beneath the crystal chandeliers, their prisms casting fractured rainbows upon the polished oak floor. A bitter wind rattled the tall mullioned windows, carrying the promise of rain, and as it turned out, misfortune. Captain Hastings had scarcely begun to admire the ancient tapestries lining the walls when Lady Winifred Ashbourne's shriek cleaved the silence like a dagger. Drawn by her cry, we hurried into the adjoining library. There, on the scarlet, Moroccan leather writing table, sat the shattered remains of an ebony inkwell, its once lustrous surface now splintered into jagged shards. Ink had spilled across the green baize blotter in thick, spreading rivulets, staining a letter that seemed never to have been read. And perched amid the broken fragments lay the motionless form of Mr. Leonard Bedford, the renowned financier, and very likely our victim. I caught the feeble flutter of his eyelids, but it was too late. A thin line of blood seeped from the eye, corner of his mouth, mingling with the inky pool beneath him. Lady Winifred, her face ashen, sank into an armchair, her trembling hand pressed to her lips. "Oh, dear God," she gasped. "He was just here, and then—" Her voice drifted away, lost among the echoes of the manor's marble halls. As the household staff gathered with whispered alarm, I knelt beside the body. No bullet wound, no obvious bruise, only the broken inkwell and those ominous smears of ink. I rose to meet the eyes of Inspector Japp, whose hawk-like gaze darted restlessly from me to the corpse. His uniform was immaculate, but his forehead bore the crease of deep concern. "Good evening." "Poirot," the inspector said, his usual grayness uncharacteristically edged with urgency. "I'm afraid we have a more perplexing matter than any ordinary theft or mischief." Monsieur Hercule Poirot, with his impeccable mustaches and faultless matinee coat, surveyed the scene with the poise of a man who knows the world's smallest details are of the utmost importance. He approached the table, his little gray cells already turning with relentless purpose. "Mon ami Hastings," he murmured softly, "observe the pattern of the ink. It flows toward the edge of the table, as though drawn by an unseen hand. Such an effect could not be accidental." I followed his gaze to the blotter, noting the way the ink-blood mixture formed a crude arrow, pointing toward the heavy curtains at the far end of the room. Poirot's delicate fingers hovered above the pool without touching it. "Blood and ink," he mused. "An odd alliance. Yet both betray the moment of violence." Lady Winifred, still unnerved, rose and advanced, her voice a quavering tremolo. "It was Leonard's habit to compose his letters here each evening. He would find solace in the rhythm of the pen, I believe. But why this inkwell?" She gestured helplessly at the shattered vessel. Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, in a house such as this, every object has its story. The inkwell, a relic from Leonard's years in Bombay, held more than mere ink. It held memories, perhaps resentments. Someone sought not only to kill the man, but to crush his sentiment." The butler, Mr. Brown, cleared his throat, begging, "Your pardon, sir, but Master Bedford did receive a letter this afternoon. It arrived by private courier. No return name." "Ah!" Poirot's eyes sparkled with that familiar glint. "A letter delivered in secret. Hastings, we must secure that missive. Inspect every hand present, the courier, the servants, anyone who might have delivered such a message." His voice was calm, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. Inspector Japp snapped to attention. "Very good, Poirot. I shall detain everyone until you have completed your initial observations." Poirot stepped back, surveying the assembly of anxious faces. Lady Winifred, fear etched in her fine features. Mr. Brown, stiff and dutiful. Mrs. Farnsworth, the housekeeper, clutching her pince-nez. And a footman, Edward, pale as a sheet. Behind them, the tall grandfather clock ticked relentlessly onward. reminding us that each moment brought us closer to unraveling or deepening the mystery. I whispered to Poirot, "But what of the direction of the ink, sir? You hinted it pointed to the curtains?" He replied softly, "Precisely, Hastings. The killer wished us to see the curtains. And behind those curtains lies our next clue." He gestured, and with a gentle click, the inspector drew them aside to reveal a narrow slit of moonlit glass just wide enough to peer through. Beyond, the rose garden lay drenched in rain, and at its center, the marble statue of Diana, still and serene. Poirot tapped his mustache. "Excellent. We shall examine the garden next. But first, let us secure the letter and every secret. This room holds." He turned to the inspector and the butler. "One false step, one overlooked detail, could cost us the truth." Thus, beneath the silent chandelier, and amid the shattered witness of glass and ink, the game began. And I had every confidence that Hercule, Poirot's little gray cells, would not rest until the mystery of the smashed inkwell and the death at Herald was laid bare. 2. The gathering of suspects by the following morning, the rain had ceased, and a pale sun struggled through heavy clouds. Yet within the somber walls of Ashbourne Manor, a more chilling storm brewed. Monsieur Poirot summoned the entire household to the drawing-room, a lofty chamber whose tall windows overlooked the rose garden now sodden with last night's downpour. Inspector Japp stood at the door, his notebook open, ready to record each statement. I took my place at Poirot's side, prepared to witness the first moves in the psychological chess game. Lady Winifred Ashbourne entered first, still dressed. In the silk gown she had worn at the library, her composure fraying at the edges. Behind her followed Miss Cecilia Ashbourne, the victim's niece, her dark curls pinned severely atop her head and her expression guarded. Colonel Malcolm Ashbourne, Leonard's younger brother, strode in next, his military bearing as rigid as his jaw. Finally, Mr. Brown the butler, Mrs. Farnsworth the housekeeper, and Edward the footman assembled in a half-circle before us. All eyes were on Poirot. "Madame," Poirot began, bowing ever so slightly, "thank you for gathering us so promptly. Each of you was in the house at the hour of Mr. Bedford's death. It is our duty to establish your whereabouts and intentions." He let his gray eyes flick from one face to another, noting the subtle shifts of posture. Lady Winifred's voice trembled. I was in the conservatory, monsieur. I could not sleep. I wished to see the roses before morning." Her gaze dropped to the patterned carpet. Miss Cecilia interjected with a cool disdain. "I was in the billiard room with my uncle until 10 o'clock, practicing my shot. He promised to teach me the finer points of break play." Her tone suggested pride more than remorse. Colonel Ashbourne's baritone snapped the air. "I was in my study, reading dispatches from India. Leonard and I corresponded often. I checked upon the latest." He folded his arms, his uniform crease immaculate. Poirot's mustaches twitched. "And you, Mr. Brown?" He asked the butler. "I was overseeing the kitchen staff, sir," Brown replied, voice low and measured. "Dinner service ran late, and I remained to inspect the silverware." He adjusted his cuffs. "Mrs. Farnsworth?" Poirot prompted. The housekeeper cleared her throat. "I retired early, monsieur. I had a headache. I slept in the servants' wing." She clutched her pince-nez as though it were a talisman. Edward the footman swallowed hard. "I was polishing the front entrance lantern, sir. I did not hear or see anything unusual until Lady Winifred's cry." Poirot nodded, surveying the gathered suspects. "Each report appears plausible, n'est-ce pas? Yet in each there lies a contradiction or a hidden truth. Hastings, observe how Lady Winifred's hands tremble, though she claims to have been alone in the conservatory. And Colonel Ashbourne's dispatches, he never learned Hindi, did he?" I recalled a casual remark from last week when Malcolm had mispronounced a Bengali phrase. Colonel Ashburn's lips tightened. Poirot continued, "I shall speak to each of you privately. But first, let us consider the letter discovered beside the shattered inkwell. It arrived by courier and bears a seal none of us recognize. Someone here knew its contents were vital." A hush fell upon the room as Poirot's eyes rested on each suspect in turn. The air was thick with unspoken suspicions. No one dared move. And thus, with each motive yet concealed, the first layer of alibis had been laid only for Poirot to dismantle them, one by one, with the precision of his little gray cells. Chapter 3. Initial interviews. Monsieur Poirot and I retired to the morning room, its walls lined with velvet drapes and a faint scent of bergamot in the air. On a small writing desk lay the sealed letter, its crimson wax unbroken. Poirot regarded it with a twitch of his mustaches. "First," he said, "we shall question Lady Winifred." She entered looking more composed than last night, but her eyes betrayed a trace of dread. Poirot offered her a small cup of tea before. Speaking, "Madame," he began gently, "you were in the conservatory until late. Pray tell me of your conversation with your nephew." Lady Winifred's hands trembled as she drew in a breath. "Leonard and I spoke of the estate, his fears of losing Ashbourne fortune to creditors. But when I left, he seemed perfectly well." She paused. "He received that letter at 3. I saw the courier hand it to him through the window." Poirot nodded, making notes. "And the seal, any notion of its origin?" She shook her head. "I do not recognize it." Next came Miss Cecilia, her posture rigid. Poirot observed her eyes flick toward the letter. "You practiced billiards, mademoiselle? Did you see anyone approach? Your uncle thereafter?" She hesitated. "Only Edward, when he carried tea into the library. He seemed agitated." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Agitated how?" Her lips thinned. "He knocked over the tray and fled." By midday, each suspect had given their account. Colonel Ashbourne claimed he heard raised voices, but thought it was Mother and Leonard arguing. Mr. Brown admitted to overhearing a scuffle, but dismissed it as servants quarreling. Mrs. Farnsworth confessed she'd peeked into the library, saw the inkwell intact, then closed the door and feared out as Hastings. I watched Poirot's eyes dart between their testimonies, noting every nuance. He folded his hands. "Now we have facts and contradictions. Let us compare them to the scene itself." With that, he beckoned me toward the garden door, ready to pursue the next thread of the mystery. Chapter 4. The first false lead, the gardens. Of Ashbourne Manor lay draped in mist as Poirot and I stepped through the ornate French doors. The early sun struggled to break through the gray veil, casting a muted light upon the clipped hedges and dew-laden rose bushes. Poirot paused beside a low stone bench, his keen gaze sweeping the scene. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, pointing to a single shoeprint in the soft earth beside the path. The print was small, delicate even, its heel pressed firmly into the damp soil. A lady's slipper, perhaps? Yet note the smear of ink upon it. I knelt to examine the mark. A dark, viscous streak, identical in hue to the spilled ink in the library. "So someone tracked ink from the scene of the crime into the garden," I said. Poirot nodded. "Exactly. But who would risk carrying such? A telltale sign? The guilty party, or one seeking to frame another?" He beckoned me to follow as he traced a faint trail of footprints winding between the rose arches. We came to a marble sundial at the center of the parterre, its face mottled with age, and its gnomon casting a thin, crooked shadow. At its base lay a scrap of paper, wet at one corner. Poirot retrieved it carefully. The paper bore an elegantly penned line, "Meet me where time stands still." The writing was neat, disciplined, unhesitating white, unlike the jagged scrawl on the letter. By Mr. Bedford's inkwell. Yet the ink matched. Curious, Poirot mused. A rendezvous arranged at the sundial, a false invitation to lure us away from the true crime scene. He tapped his lips thoughtfully. But note the style of writing. Precise, controlled, almost theatrical. Who among our suspects writes thus? I considered. Lady Winifred's handwriting was known to be neat, suitable for formal correspondence. Colonel Ashbourne, more given to curt dispatches, would hardly indulge in such flourish. Miss Cecilia might practice calligraphy as a genteel pastime. Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Brown, concerned only with orders and service, less likely. Poirot pocketed the scrap. We must test this invitation. I propose we wait here until the hour indicated, though that may prove to be a fool's errand. He tapped the sundial face. It is now 9:30. Let us return to the house and resume our inquiries. Then return here at 10. We retraced our steps beneath the shadowed arches, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Before we reached the house, Poirot halted again. Hastings noticed this. He pointed to a rose bush with a single bloom crushed at its base, petals stained with ink. Deliberate sabotage to ensure the rendezvous note was noticed. A distraction, I frowned. So the culprit wants us to chase shadows in the garden. Poirot smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Precisely. A false lead to occupy our minds while the true evidence lies elsewhere. He placed a hand on my shoulder, but this misdirection serves a purpose. It tells us the murderer is cunning, confident in his or her ability to control our attention, and that they expect us to act impulsively. Back inside the manor, the drawing room held a tense air. Inspector Japp peered at his watch. Will we return to the garden, Poirot? He asked. Poirot nodded, then addressed the assembled household. I thank you all for your patience. We have discovered a note in the garden. Meet me where time. Stand still. A clever invitation, but I fear it leads nowhere of import. He cast a measuring glance across the room. And yet, the hand that composed those words reveals much about its author. Who among you writes with such theatrical precision? Miss Cecilia's brow furrowed at his glance. Colonel Ashbourne shifted uneasily. Lady Winifred's gaze flickered to her nephew's desk, as though recalling the afternoon's events. Each shifted under Poirot's scrutiny. Let us speak once more of Mr. Bedford's letter, Poirot continued, producing the sealed envelope. It arrived with no return address, bearing a seal unknown to us. I must ask, has anyone seen such a seal before? Mr. Brown cleared his throat. Never, sir. It was unfamiliar to me. Nor to me, Mrs. Farnsworth added, adjusting her pince-nez. Edward merely shook his head, white-knuckled. Poirot's eyes glittered. Then it remains a mystery. However, the scrap found in the garden was penned with the same ink. We see that the same person who wrote the garden note also delivered the fatal blow or expected another to do so. Inspector Japp muttered, a person too clever by half. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, Japp, we now know our murderer is bold enough to misdirect us with theatrics. But boldness belies overconfidence, and overconfidence can be exploited. He turned to me, whispering loud enough for all to hear. Hastings, prepare to return with me to the sundial at precisely 10 o'clock. There, we shall uncover the next clue which, I trust, will lead us closer to the truth rather than away from it. Thus, with a false lead uncovered and a garden rendezvous set, Poirot demonstrated that every trick holds within it a revelation, if one knows where to look. And I had no doubt his little gray cells would soon pierce the veil of misdirection to reveal the killer's true intent. Chapter 5. The Psychological Game. The clock in the great hall chimed 10 as Poirot and I retraced our steps toward the sundial. In the rose garden, a thin mist still clung to the hedges, and dew sparkled on every petal, but no one else was present to witness our vigil. Inspector Japp lingered a few paces behind, notebook in hand, his expression a mixture of skepticism and begrudging admiration for Poirot's unorthodox methods. We stood beneath the damp arches, eyes fixed on the marble sundial. Poirot's lips curved into a subtle smile. "Mon ami," he whispered, "this hour is perfect for our psychological game. The murderer expects us here, and will act out of character, revealing a truth they sought to conceal." I nodded, recalling the scrap of paper. "Meet me where time stands still." Poirot tapped the sundial's base with his cane. "Observe whether any footmarks circle the pedestal, Hastings." I knelt, brushing aside damp leaves to reveal a faint semicircle of prints too small for the butler or the colonel, more suited to a dainty foot. "Miss Cecilia?" I ventured. Poirot held up a finger. "Patient, Hastings. Let us watch." We waited in silence, the garden enveloped in a hush broken only by the dripping of water from the overhanging eaves. 10 minutes passed, and still no one appeared. Poirot stroked his mustaches thoughtfully. Now we moved to the next phase. He led me toward a nearby rose arch, where a single lantern hung. The game is not in the meeting, but in the absence of one. We shall test each suspect's reaction to the promise of clandestine correspondence. He produced the scrap of paper and held it before me. "Watch closely." Returning to the manor, Poirot requested the presence of all suspects once more, this time in the gallery overlooking the drawing room. Each entered in turn. Lady Winifred, her face composed behind a veil of concern. Miss Cecilia, cheeks flushed. Colonel Ashbourne, impassive yet alert. Mr. Brown, precise and dutiful. Mrs. Farnsworth, anxious. And Edward, pallid with apprehension. Poirot held aloft the garden scrap. This invitation was meant to lure someone to the sundial at 10. We waited in vain. He let his gaze rest on Cecilia. "Mademoiselle, you practiced billiards here in the gallery. Did you receive such a note?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "No," she whispered. He moved on to Lady Winifred. "Madame, you claim to have gone to the conservatory, yet the messenger arrived at 3. Did you speak of any meeting?" She shook her head, but her fingers fidgeted with the lace cuff of her sleeve. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then the note's purpose was not to summon us, but to provoke a reaction. He addressed the group as a whole. "I ask each of you to inspect this scrap." He handed the note to Colonel Ashbourne, watching his face closely. The colonel glanced at it, then hesitated as if expecting something. Yet he returned it without comment. One by one, each suspect examined the paper. Mrs. Farnsworth's brow furrowed. Mr. Brown adjusted his pince-nez in confusion. Edward's hand trembled as he held the damp slip. Only Miss Cecilia recoiled, whispering, "It's from you, Hastings," before pushing it away. Poirot seized upon her gesture. "Ah, a slip of the tongue reveals much. You expected a note, but not from the unknown courier. You thought," he turned to her deliberately, "that it would be from me or from Hastings to test your resolve?" Her cheeks flamed, but she remained silent. Poirot surveyed the assembled faces. Our culprit desires to see fear in a chosen victim. By creating a false rendezvous, they compelled an emotional response. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And that response tells us who they wish to torment and why." Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "In other words, the murderer set a trap to gauge someone's guilt or innocence." Poirot inclined his head. "Exactament. And Thepperson most rattled by this. Theatrical ploy is our prime suspect." He turned directly to Miss Cecilia. "You, mademoiselle, are practiced in deception publicly composed, yet privately unsettled. Your reaction betrays your knowledge of such correspondence." She sank into a chair, unable to meet his eyes. Poirot patted her shoulder kindly. Fear is a cunning accomplice to guilt, and in the hunter's trap, the prey reveals itself. He straightened. Now, Miss Cecilia, tell us honestly, what secret do you conceal, and how does it relate to the shattered inkwell? Thus, the psychological game began to cleave through the armor of politeness, forcing truth from beneath layers of artifice, and bringing Hercule, Poirot ever closer to unmasking the murder among them. Chapter 6. The Vanished Courier by Late. Afternoon. A new shock reached Ashbourne Manor. Inspector Japp appeared in the drawing-room, face drawn. Monsieur Poirot, Hastings, something most alarming has occurred. Poirot's, his mustaches bristling. Pray, enlighten us. The private courier who delivered Mr. Bedford's letter has gone missing, Japp announced. His lodging is a quarter-mile from here. His landlady reports he never returned last night. I found his satchel dropped on the doorstep of the stables, and traces of blood on the cobblestones. A hush fell. Colonel Ashbourne's brow creased. Lady Winifred clutched her lace handkerchief. Even Mrs. Farnsworth looked pale. Poirot's eyes gleamed with acute interest. Mon Dieu! A second crime, indeed this time, against one who merely served our victim. He beckoned us to follow. We hurried through the manor toward the stables, where Edward held a lantern aloft, revealing the courier's leather satchel lying open on the damp stone. A dark stain sullied its flap. Poirot crouched, examining the imprint. Blood and ink once more, Hastings, he murmured. But notice how the smear is smeared dragged, rather than dropped. I knelt beside him, as if the courier was struck and his satchel pulled from him. Poirot's cane tapped thoughtfully. Yes, and then the satchel cast aside deliberately. The murderer seeks silence in every corner of this investigation. We relocated the search to the courier's lodging, a modest room above Mrs. Delaney's bakery. The landlady met us at the door, trembling. I heard a commotion about midnight, sir, she whispered. A muffled cry, then hushed voices. I peeked through the keyhole, but saw only a tall, dark figure. Poirot inclined his head. Did you note any peculiar detail? A distinctive gait? A scarf, perhaps? Mrs. Delaney shivered. He wore a cloak, sir, a heavy wool cloak, buttoned high. But I dare not say, he carried a small statuette in his hand. A statuette? Poirot repeated. What kind? Lady? Winifred's silver figurine, the one from her private collection. The room fell silent. Lady Winifred gasped, pressing a gloved hand to her throat. My figurine borrowed to photograph for the catalogue. It was returned last week. Poirot's eyes darted among the assembled suspects, all brought reluctantly to the scene. It would seem our culprit wields more than ink and broken glass now theft and violence reach their hands. He turned to Colonel Ashbourne. Were you aware the courier lodged here? The colonel shook his head. Miss Cecilia's face was ashen. Mr. Brown and Mrs. Farnsworth exchanged uneasy glances. Only Edward appeared steady, though his lips trembled. Poirot continued, we must examine the statuette and ascertain its meaning. It is no mere ornament, but a symbol chosen deliberately. He swept the room with his gaze. Monsieur Japp, secure every exit. No one leaves until I have questioned each of you. Outside, the sky had dimmed. Rain threatened once more, as though the elements conspired with man's darker impulses. Poirot took the statuette, an elegant silver dancer, poised mid-leap from Mrs. Delaney's trembling hands. Under its base was an inscription, to my partner in the waltz of fate. The words were engraved with precise artistry. Partner in the waltz of fate, Poirot mused. A poetic reference, but to whom? And why deliver such a gift to a courier? He turned to the butler. Mr. Brown, do you recall who requested the figurine to be photographed? Brown cleared his throat. Lady Winifred commissioned the catalogue, sir, but she returned the figurine the same afternoon. He bowed his head. And you, Mrs. Farnsworth, were you present when the courier left this? Did you see the figurine? In his possession? The housekeeper swallowed. No, monsieur. I only learned of the courier's lodgings this morning. Poirot's attention snapped to Miss Cecilia. Mademoiselle, you accompany your aunt on such errands. You must have seen the statue. Cecilia's eyes filled with tears. I saw it when I delivered the photographs to the printer. But afterward, I handed it back to the courier myself. Poirot studied her closely. Why did you do so? To protect someone? Or to conceal your own involvement? She bit her lip, but offered no answer. At that moment, Poirot tapped the statuette lightly. Precision engraving, blood, ink, a missing. Courier, a stolen trinket. Each element forms a mosaic of intent. The murderer wishes us to see chaos, yet within every gesture lies a calculated message. He turned to Inspector Japp. Our investigation deepens, yet each fresh crime is but another layer of the murderer's design. Hastings, we must revisit the library and review the letters and statuette together. There, in the sanctuary of words and symbols, the true pattern shall emerge. Thus, with a second crime committed and a vanished courier, Poirot's little gray cells faced a darker, danse waltz of fate more intricate than any before. Chapter 7. A secret testament. Late that evening, the flickering lamplight in Poirot's study cast long shadows upon the walls, as if drawing the dark motives of Ashbourne Manor into relief. Monsieur Poirot stood at his polished desk, the sealed letter before him at last. Inspector Japp and I waited respectfully as he released the crimson wax with a deft twist of his penknife. The seal fell away, and Poirot unfolded the heavy cream. Parchment within. Hastings, Japp, he said quietly, prepare yourselves for a revelation that alters the very nature of this affair. His voice was hushed, yet its gravity filled the room. With a steady hand he removed the letter and perched it upon a blotter. Leonard Bedford commissioned this document only days ago. I drew closer. It looks like a will, sir. Poirot nodded. Indeed. A new will, bequeathing Ashbourne Manor and its entire contents, not to Lady Winifred, nor Colonel Ashbourne, but to an unnamed beneficiary, my dearest friend, whose loyalty surpasses blood. He tapped the parchment. No name, only these words. Inspector Japp frowned. So someone planned to disinherit the family? Who would benefit? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That is what we must discover. Note the paper's watermark Ashbourne stationery, so penned. Within the manor itself. And the handwriting, confident, graceful, yet with that slight flourish at the end of each Y, reminiscent of our mysterious garden note. He pointed to the scrap in his other hand. Same ink, same hand. We exchanged glances. The candlelight danced on the walls as Lady Winifred, called upon, entered the study in trembling silk. Poirot greeted her with gentle courtesy. Madame, I trust you understand the contents of this testament. She drew a shuddering breath. A will? For Leonard to leave everything to someone unknown? That cannot be. Her gloved hands clasped. Before her, he loved this family. He would never. Poirot inclined his head. You must remain calm, madame. This document was drawn by Leonard's own hand. It is valid. Lady Winifred's composure cracked. But who? Why would he? She sank into a chair, eyes staring at the floor. I noted the play of pain across her face. Was it betrayal or relief? Before she could speak further, Colonel Ashbourne entered, drawn by our summons. His usual restraint faltered. What is this nonsense? He demanded, glancing at the will. Leonard never mentioned any new will to me. Poirot regarded him coolly. That is of no consequence to the law. The matter now concerns the identity of the beneficiary. He turned the parchment so both siblings could read. Leonard wrote, to my dearest friend, whose loyalty surpasses. Blood, I bequeath Ashbourne Manor, no other name. Colonel Ashbourne's jaw clenched. A prank, perhaps. Inspector Japp stepped forward. I think not. The writing matches the ink used elsewhere in the murder. Whoever wrote this will is the same who orchestrated the crimes. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Precisely. And that person knew Leonard's intentions and sought to destroy him for refusing to leave the inheritance. His gaze locked on. Miss Cecilia, as she appeared in the doorway, summoned by Japp, her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, what do you know of this will? She hesitated, then advanced, her eyes glistening. I found a copy of Leonard's previous will in the library archive. He left everything equally to us, Winifred, Malcolm, myself. But I found no trace of this new document. Her voice trembled. He never showed it to me. Poirot nodded. And yet someone did. He turned to Mr. Brown and Mrs. Farnsworth. Called into the room. You both handled Leonard's correspondence. Did either of you see him draft something? Mr. Brown cleared his throat. I delivered a draft from the secretary's desk 2 days ago, sir. But I assumed it was a business memorandum. Business memorandum? Poirot repeated. On Ashbourne letterhead? Brown dipped his head. Yes, monsieur. Mrs. Farnsworth adjusted her pince-nez. I recall Miss Cecilia scribbling notes by the Inkwel last week, but I thought it was for her college essays. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Interesting. 2 possible witnesses misled by appearances. He folded his hands. The will's beneficiary remains unknown, yet its existence answers one question. The motive. Our culprit murders and misdirects to prevent Leonard's intentions from coming to light. Lady Winifred rose, voice faltering. Then someone among us stole that will. Yes, Poirot replied. Softly, and someone frightened of disinheritance killed to conceal it. He caught my eye. Hastings, fetch the ledger of Ashbourne Manor's accounts. We shall compare names and payments. There may lie the identity of the dearest. Friend, I bowed and left the room, heart pounding. In Poirot's study, the air was taut with urgency. Each suspect's reaction had peeled away another layer of illusion. The killer's design was growing clearer, yet their true identity remained hidden behind the veil of family loyalty and greed. As I returned with the dusty ledger, I felt the weight of destiny pressing upon us all. The testament revealed a betrayal deeper than any we had yet uncovered, one that would force the little gray cells to reckon not only with motive, but with the twisted bonds of friendship and blood. Chapter 8. The hidden ledger. The study's heavy. Drapes were drawn against the gathering dusk when I returned with the Ashbourne ledger in hand. Monsieur Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, his face illuminated by the flicker of candlelight. Across the room, Inspector Japp leaned against a mahogany writing table, tapping his pen impatiently. Ah, Hastings, Poirot said with a gentle nod, you are punctual as ever. Let us examine these accounts. He motioned to the ornate armchairs that faced each other beside the hearth. I placed the worn ledger on the low table between us. Its leather spine, cracked from years of use. Inspector Japp flipped open the cover. The entries seemed straightforward: rents, maintenance, staff wages. He frowned. Where does the mystery lie, Poirot? Monsieur Poirot seated himself, folding the ledger open at a bookmarked page. Observe, Japp. Every entry is accounted for, until this one. He tapped a line dated 3 weeks prior, a payment of £200 to an entity listed only as AV. The notation read, consulting services rendered, but provided. No further detail. Mrs. Farnsworth, present as a witness, gasped softly. That's odd, she murmured. No one by those initials works here. Colonel Ashbourne cleared his throat. Could be an outside consultant, an architect or solicitor. Poirot's mustaches quivered. Indeed, Malcolm, yet the sum is substantial for such services. £200 could pay half a year's wages for our butler. He lifted his eyes to the butler himself. "Mr. Brown, you oversaw the Manor's silverware appraisal last month. Did you arrange any external evaluation?" Brown bowed. His head, "No, monsieur. I requested a local appraiser, Mr. Coleman, who billed only £50. Poirot's gaze returned to the ledger. "Then who is a V?" He turned the pages until he found a matching debit entry the following week. Return of funds AV. The amount, again £200, was credited back to the estate. "A refund?" Inspector Japp repeated. "So AV was paid and then reimbursed?" "Precisely," Poirot replied. "A transaction made and undone by the same hand." He tapped the ledger. "This suggests someone staged the payment to conceal a different movement of funds or to fabricate a trail." He paused, letting the implication settle. Miss Cecilia, who had been silent until now, spoke with forced calm. "Perhaps someone paid AV to obtain that statuette photograph, then returned the money when they no longer needed it." Poirot inclined his head. "A reasonable hypothesis, mademoiselle, but consider the timing. The payment was made 3 weeks ago long, before the statuette was lent, and the refund occurred only days before Leonard's death." He bookmarked the page and closed the ledger softly. This was not about the figurine at all. Lady Winifred's eyes shone with distress. Then what was the purpose of these transactions? Monsieur Poirot rose, his figure lithe in the lamplight. "A deception, madame. A false financial trail meant to distract us, much like the garden note and the shattered inkwell." He paced a few steps, cane tapping thoughtfully. "But more than distraction. A message. The initials AV must mean something to someone here." He stopped before the fireplace. "Hastings, recall our late courier's statuette inscribed. Partner in the waltz of fate, the initials. Could they correspond?" He turned to Inspector Japp. "Who among you shares those initials?" Japp considered. "Only Edward Vale, the footman. But his pay is minimal. He could not be behind such sums." Edward Vale, summoned by name, stepped forward with a pale face. "Sir, I assure you I know nothing of these payments. My wages are hardly £200 in a year." Poirot nodded, expression inscrutable. "I believe you, Edward. Yet the coincidence demands investigation. Hastings, fetch the courier's satchel." I hurried to retrieve it from the corner where it had been laid aside. Within lay the silver, dancer statuette, and a small leather-bound notebook, its cover marked simply with the initials AV. The room fell silent. Poirot opened the notebook, revealing pages of careful script. He read aloud, "Ashbourne Inquiries, Secure Loyalty. Meeting scheduled." The entries were dated the same week as the ledger's transactions. Inspector Japp frowned. So the courier was keeping notes for AV, whoever that is, and was paid handsomely for their service. Then the money was returned. Why? Poirot replaced the notebook and closed the ledger. Because the payment was never for services rendered, but to manufacture an alias and the refund to erase its trace when it served its purpose. He let his gaze sweep the assembled suspects. Our hidden beneficiary is not merely a friend. They are the puppet master, using every tool, ink, glass, money to choreograph this tragedy. He turned to Colonel Ashburn. "Go through your correspondence letters, telegrams, any hint of someone with the initials AV." Then he looked to Lady Winifred. "And you, madame, inquire of your social circle. Perhaps AV is not a staff member, but a confidant from another ballroom." Each face reflected dawning comprehension and dread. Poirot's little gray cells had peeled back yet another layer of camouflage, exposing the killer's financial gambit. Yet the identity behind those two letters remained elusive, waiting for the final piece to fall into place. As the wind rattled the study windows, I felt the mystery tighten around us. The hidden ledger had yielded its secret, and with it, Another step toward unveiling the architect of this intricate crime. Chapter 9. The final. Gathering late on the following afternoon, a curious stillness settled over Ashbourne Manor. The rain held its breath, and even the staff moved like shadows, careful not to disturb the charged atmosphere. Monsieur Poirot had summoned every member of the household to the grand library, its walls lined with leather-bound tomes and its amber lamps burning low. In the center stood a semicircle of chairs, each bearing the name of a suspect: Lady Winifred, Colonel Malcolm Ashbourne, Miss Cecilia Ashbourne, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Farnsworth, and Edward Vale. Inspector Japp and I awaited behind Poirot, whose posture was as precise as ever. Poirot cleared his throat softly. "Mies Amos, we are assembled here for one purpose: to untangle the web of deception that has led to 2 deaths. He swept his gaze across the faces before him, noting the subtle tensions: Lady Winifred's trembling fingers, the Colonel's rigid shoulders, Cecilia's ashen countenance. Each of you has contributed a thread to this tapestry. Now I shall gather them together and find the knot." He produced the scrap of paper found at the sundial. First, the garden note: "Meet me where time stands still," a diversion designed to occupy our minds. Yet the handwriting reveals a flourish only one among you employs. He looked at Cecilia. She swallowed, but did not speak. Next, the shattered inkwell and the spilled letter, Poirot continued, lifting the envelope bearing Leonard's final will. "This document bequeathed Ashbourne Manor to a friend whose loyalty surpasses blood, a friend whose identity remains hidden." He paused, allowing the weight of that secrecy to settle. The seal was crafted to hide the benefactor's name, but the ink matches the ledger's entries to A.V. He held up the silver statuette, a dancer poised in mid-waltz partner in the waltz of fate. The initials A.V. appear on the courier's notebook, and payments to a V were made and then refunded to hide their trail. Colonel Ashbourne frowned. "Sir, I admit I authorized." "Nothing of the sort. I know no A.V., save perhaps our footman, but he could never afford such sums." Poirot inclined his head. "Precisely, Colonel. The payment was never intended for services rendered, but to create an alias, to mislead us, and to implicate the innocent." He addressed Edward Vale directly. "Edouard, you have nothing to confess?" Edward's face paled. "Sir, I swear I know nothing beyond polishing the lanterns." Poirot turned to Mrs. Farnsworth. "You overheard the inkwell fall, then saw it intact moments before, yet you claimed to be unwell." The housekeeper bowed her head. "I was faint, monsieur, and wished to avoid distressing sights." "And you, Mr. Brown," Poirot continued, "heard a scuffle dismissed as servants' quarrel." The butler's lips pressed thin. "I spoke only as I remembered." Poirot raised a delicate finger. "All true, but all insufficient. Let us consider motive. Who among you stood to lose the most by Leonard's new will?" He paused, letting the question hang like a sword over their heads. Yet Miss Cecilia's voice trembled. I loved my uncle. He promised me guidance and a share of the inheritance. He would not leave me penniless." Lady Winifred's tone was quiet, but firm. "Leonard's decision pained me, yet I bore it with dignity. His happiness mattered more than wealth." Colonel Ashbourne clenched his fists. "He never confided in me, never explained why he would choose another." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Then let us examine your actions. Cecilia, you accompanied your aunt to deliver the statuettes, photographs, and later handled the figurine yourself. You knew its value sentimentally and as evidence." Cecilia's shoulders drooped. "I only wished to protect her reputation." Poirot turned to the ledger. "The payment to A.V. occurred 3 weeks ago, before the statuette was removed. The refund arrived only days before Leonard's death." He looked at Lady Winifred. You commissioned the catalog photos and returned the figurine. Yourself yet, you claimed no knowledge of the metallic dancer beyond its aesthetic worth. Lady Winifred's eyes glistened. I had no reason to think it more than ornament. Yet someone used it as a symbol, Poirot said. A message to Leonard's chosen friend. Avi, the beneficiary, was celebrated by this gift. He let silence fill the room. Inspector Japp broke the stillness. So the murderer is the beneficiary themselves, Avi, and has orchestrated every step to hide their identity. Poirot inclined his head in agreement. But who among you bears those initials and possesses both motive and means? He stepped forward, addressing the assembled group. The answer lies in the final contradiction. The courier's satchel shows only one shoe print, a small heel, but Miss Cecilia confessed to wearing pumps with a coarser sole, Mrs. Farnsworth's. Shoes bear a broader print. Colonel Ashbourne's boots are far too large. Lady Winifred's slippers are soft, but her footprint in the garden was too delicate. Only one shoe and one person matches that slender imprint. Eyes widened. Each suspect bent to inspect the floor beneath the nearest lamp, scrutinizing their footwear. Poirot held up a small leather-bound notebook. This belonged to our missing courier, and within it are notes addressed to A.V., the first entry. Speaks of loyalty, the second of betrayal. He read, "My friend, soon all will be yours." He closed the notebook, the final piece of the puzzle, now visible yet unnamed. He turned to us all, mustaches quivering with anticipation. "One last question. Who among you walks silently in the garden at midnight, carries a cipher for Leonard's will, and conceals their initials beneath another name?" A tense hush enveloped the library, each face reflecting dread. Poirot's little gray cells had laid bare every clue, every misdirection, but the killer still stood unbowed, their identity poised on the edge of revelation. And with that, the final gathering concluded, leaving only the climactic reveal to follow. Chapter 10. The veil lifted, a hush fell over the library as Poirot stepped forward, his little gray cells having traversed every twist and turn of the case. I felt my pulse quicken, every suspect's fate now balanced on the edge of his words. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, voice serene but firm. "We have gathered each clue, the shattered inkwell, the crimson-sealed will, the garden invitation, the stolen statuette, and the ledger's cryptic payments to A.V. Each thread, when woven together, reveals the tapestry's hidden face." He held up the courier's notebook. "Within these pages lie notes addressed to A.V., the initials of our unknown beneficiary. But why reverse the true initials of Edward Vale? Because the murderer sought to cloak his identity with subtle misdirection. I watched as Edward Vale, the footman, paled, his lips parting in sudden awareness. Poirot continued, "Edward Vale, your real initials, E.V., when inverted, become a V. Thus you concealed your inheritance under an alias, paid from the estate, and then refunded to erase this trail. You borrowed Lady Winifred's statuette to fashion a symbol for your partner in the waltz of fate, the one you believed would claim Ashbourne Manor." Edward's shoulders trembled. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, voice hoarse. Silence. Poirot interjected gently, yet without indulgence. "Let me explain. After Mr. Bedford revised his will to make you his sole heir, a secret kept between the two of you, you feared discovery by the Ashbourne family. You hired the courier, skilled in discretion, to deliver messages and forge documents. When you realized Leonard planned to reveal your connection, when he showed me the sealed testament, you panicked. The room stirred. Lady Winifred's hand flew to her mouth. Colonel Ashbourne's brow tightened. Miss Cecilia rose, eyes wide, Poirot's gaze fixed on Edward. On the night of the murder, you slipped into the library. You struck Leonard with the Inkwell's base, crushing the vessel to conceal the weapon. You used his blood to smear the ink, an artistic flourish, reflective of your theatrical nature, yet betraying your presence. You planted the garden note to distract us, hoping we would waste precious time chasing shadows. He paused, letting the weight hang in the air. When the private courier threatened to speak, to reveal your secret, you delivered the fatal blow to silence him. You dumped his satchel, stained with his blood and ink, at the stables, confident no one would connect the two crimes. Inspector Japp stepped forward. Edward Vale, you are under arrest for the murders of Leonard Bedford and the private courier. Any resistance will be met with force. Edward sank to his knees, head bowed. It was not for greed, he whispered. Leonard saved me when I was destitute, a boy cast out by my own family. He promised to make me his heir. I loved him, and I wanted to protect his generosity. I never meant to kill. Lady Winifred approached, kneeling beside him. Oh, Edward, he trusted you. Her voice trembled through tears. Colonel Ashbourne spoke quietly. You repaid his kindness with violence. Poirot watched them all with a gentle sadness. Human nature is a labyrinth, Mies Amos. Kindness can breed obsession, and loyalty can twist into possessiveness. Edward believed himself worthy of a secret legacy, and when faced with loss, he chose desperation over truth. Edward Vale was led away, the echo of his footsteps fading through the corridors. The household stood silent, the grandeur of Ashbourne Manor momentarily shattered by tragedy. Later, as the storm broke outside, Poirot and I stood in the billiard room. He surveyed the rain-swept garden through the window. Hastings, the little gray cells have done their work once again. A crime woven of sentiment and secrecy, resolved by the smallest details, an inverted initial, a single footprint, the smear of ink. I nodded. Your methods never cease to amaze me, sir. Poirot smiled, adjusting his lapel. There is order in chaos, mon ami, and truth in every deception, if one only knows where to look. He tapped his temple lightly. The heart can conceal as well as the mind, but not forever. As dawn broke, Monsieur Poirot prepared to depart Ashbourne Manor. Lady Winifred, safe but sorrowful, bid him farewell with a quiet gratitude. Inspector Japp clasped his hand, acknowledging a case brilliantly concluded. I, Captain Hastings, remained by Poirot's side. He turned to me with that characteristic sparkle in his eyes. Allons, Hastings. Let us seek a hot cup of tea and lighter conversation. Crime, after all, is fatiguing for the little gray cells. And so, beneath a sky washed clean by rain, Hercule Poirot and I left Ashbourne Manor behind, its secrets unveiled, its tragedies laid to rest, and the elegant order of justice restored. Chapter 11. The echo of justice a week after Edward Vale's arrest, Ashbourne Manor had settled into a hushed solemnity. The rose garden no longer bore the weight of last night's mist. Its blooms stood tall under the bright summer sun, as though determined to reclaim the serenity once shattered by violence. Poirot and I returned to the great hall, where Lady Winifred awaited in a simple muslin gown, her composure steadied by time and reflection. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, your presence has been a balm to our troubled household. Though the wounds remain, your insight has brought clarity. Her eyes, once clouded with uncertainty, now shone with a quiet resolve. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, it is not I who heals, but the truth. For when lies are banished, the soul finds rest. He glanced toward the portrait gallery, where the stern visages of Ashbourne ancestors seemed to regard us in approving silence. Inspector Japp joined us, rumpled but satisfied. I have filed my report with Scotland Yard. Mr. Vale's confession, though tinged with tragic devotion, confirms the facts. The case is closed. He placed his notebook in his coat pocket. I shall miss our little gray cells at work, Poirot. I watched as Poirot accepted Japp's tribute with a graceful nod. The pleasure, mon ami, is mutual. Every mind enriches the dance of deduction. He turned to Lady Winifred. Madame, the estate will pass to its rightful steward or, in this case, to its fearful beneficiary, now in custody. She sighed, a sound equal parts sorrow and relief. I shall see that Edward receives fair treatment. His motives, twisted though they became, sprang from gratitude and loyalty. She paused. He meant to honor Leonard's generosity, yet failed to understand that kindness cannot be seized by force. A hush fell. Poirot studied her with gentle compassion. Human affection is a treasure, but it must be nurtured by honesty. When gratitude becomes possession, it poisons the heart. We strolled through the corridors toward the library once more. The shattered inkwell had been replaced by an ornate crystal penstand, and the blotter bore no stain. The very air felt lighter, as though the walls themselves exhaled after bearing witness to tragedy. In the snug of the billiard room later, Poirot and I shared a pot of tea and slices of Lady Winifred's famous lemon cake. He savored each crumb with quiet satisfaction. Hastings, he mused. This case was notable for its theatrical deceptions, ink and glass, ledgers, and letters, inverted initials, all conspiring in a dark ballet. Yet at its heart lay a human drama, love, gratitude, envy. No trickery can outlast the simple truth of the human soul. I nodded, stirring my tea. It was your kindness that unraveled the most delicate threads. Sir, your faith that each suspect, even the guilty one, harbored a motive born of passion rather than malice. Exactament, Poirot replied. He tapped his temple. The little gray cells are not mere instruments of logic. They perceive the nuances of sentiment. In every heartbeat there lies a clue. As afternoon waned, Lady Winifred joined us with word that the household would hold a remembrance for Leonard, an intimate gathering in the rose garden at twilight. She invited us both to attend. Poirot accepted with a gracious bow. It shall be my honor to pay tribute to a man of such generosity. That evening, beneath the bronze sundial, the very spot of false rendezvous gathered in subdued reverence. The lanterns glowed in the fading light, casting soft pools of warmth among the blooms. Each member of the household laid a single rose upon the marble base, a gesture of remembrance and reconciliation. Poirot stood nearby, arms folded, observing the gentle tableau. I noted the quiet strength in Lady Winifred's posture and the tentative hope in Colonel Ashbourne's eyes. Even Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Brown stood together, their mutual loyalty rekindled by shared sorrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painter's pointillism like sky awash with rose and gold, Poirot turned to me with that familiar sparkle. Hastings, he whispered, justice is served, but mercy endures. In recognizing the humanity even of our miscreants, we affirm the best of ourselves. I smiled, feeling the weight of the case lift at last. A fitting end, sir. Together, we stepped away from the sundial, leaving its silent witness to the cycle of grief and healing. And as the first stars emerged, I understood that in each mystery solved, there lies not just the triumph of reason, but the enduring echo of compassion. Chapter 11. Outcome and out. Just as the hush that fell upon Ashbourne Manor in the days following Edward Vale's confession was profound, the household went about its duties with quiet efficiency, each member aware that the grand walls they tended had been the stage for tragedy. Yet beneath the surface, there was a sense of resolution like a wound that, though still tender, had at least begun to scab and heal. Monsieur Poirot convened the family and staff in the morning-room once more, his presence both reassuring and exacting. Lady Winifred, now clad in a simple morning dress, greeted him with a measured bow. Colonel Ashbourne stood stiffly beside her, no trace of his former hauteur diminished by recent sorrow. Miss Cecilia, restored to something like composure, sat Near the window, her gaze distant, Mr. Brown and Mrs. Farnsworth stood together by the hearth, their bond strengthened by the ordeal. And even Edward's empty place at the table spoke volumes. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, voice gentle. "We have seen that a grateful heart, when twisted by fear, can become as dangerous as hatred." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Yet justice demands not only punishment but understanding. Edward Vale confessed to 2 grievous crimes, murder and concealment, but he did so out of misguided loyalty. Lady Winifred's eyes filled with tears. He honored my brother's generosity, only to be betrayed by his own fear. Poirot inclined his head. "Exactement, madame. In the eyes of the law, Edward must answer for his actions. But in the eyes of the heart, we must remember Leonard's compassion that gave him hope." He turned to Inspector Japp. "Japp, I trust the Crown will show such mercy as the case warrants." Inspector Japp nodded gravely. "I have recommended leniency, given his confession and the circumstances. The courts will consider his motives alongside the gravity of his deeds." Poirot allowed a faint smile. "There is order even within mercy, mon ami. A sentence tempered by understanding still upholds the rule of law." He next addressed Colonel Ashbourne. "Malcolm, the estate's affairs now pass to the Crown until the question of inheritance is resolved." The colonel bowed his head. "I accept it, Poirot. My brother's will sealed, until the beneficiary is confirmed, must be honored, even if it points to no living heir." Miss Cecilia spoke softly. "As Leonard's niece, I remain concerned for the manor's future." Her voice quavered, but she met Poirot's eyes. "I wish to see his legacy preserved." Poirot's mustaches twitched with approval. "A noble desire, mademoiselle. Leonard's true wish was for Ashbourne Manor to endure as a place of solace, not only for family, but for any soul in need. Your stewardship may yet fulfill that purpose." He turned to the staff. "And you, Mrs. Farnsworth, Mr. Brown, your loyalty has been tested, yet you remain steadfast." They inclined respectfully. "Your continued service ensures the household's stability until a new chapter begins." As proceedings concluded, Poirot and I strolled through the sunlit corridors. The library, once silent with dread, now seemed a sanctuary of quiet reflection. The crystal penstand gleamed on the desk where the inkwell had shattered, symbolizing restoration. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "justice in this affair has been more than the capture of a murderer. It has been the restoration of truth, and the mercy afforded to one who committed crime from love rather than malice." He paused beside the grand window overlooking the garden. "Ashes to ashes, seeds to bloom life's cycles mirror our work as detectives. We uncover the past to allow the future to flourish." I nodded, watching a pair of robins flit among the rose bushes. "And in uncovering Edward's fate, you've shown that the greatest verdict is compassion tempered by justice." Poirot smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Yes, mon ami, for what is justice without humanity? A cold decree." He tapped his temple lightly. "The little gray cells must always remember the beating heart they serve." Later, as we prepared to depart, Lady Winifred offered her hand. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for revealing the truth and guiding us toward grace." Poirot accepted her hand with a bow. "Madame, it has been my privilege." In the carriage that took us away from Ashbourne Manor, I reflected on the case's lessons, that the sharpest deduction must be wielded with gentleness, that the most cunning disguise cannot mask a troubled conscience forever, and that, above all, justice must walk hand in hand with mercy. And so, with the manor's fate secure for now, we journeyed onward. Two companions bound by respect and the knowledge that, wherever human nature's mysteries beckon, Hercule Poirot's little gray cells will be ready to illuminate them. Chapter 12. The Parting. Inside the morning sun cast a warm glow through the arched windows of Ashbourne Manor's entrance hall as I and Monsieur Poirot prepared to depart. Our journey had stretched from shattered inkwells to stolen statuettes, from hidden ledgers to inverted initials, but now, at the end of our odyssey, a hush of finality lay upon the grand estate. Lady Winifred Ashbourne stood at the foot of the marble staircase, her mourning attire replaced by a simple yet elegant travel cloak, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and melancholy. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady but soft, "this household owes you more than we can ever express. You have not only uncovered the truth, but guided us toward healing." She extended her hand, and Poirot accepted it with his characteristic bow, his mustaches quivering ever so slightly. "In deference, Madame," Poirot replied, "it is the duty of the detective to restore order. Yet it is the courage of the heart that permits forgiveness. You and your family have demonstrated such courage in abundance." He released her hand gently and turned toward the waiting carriage. Colonel Ashbourne appeared behind his sister, offering a brief nod of respect. "Thank you, monsieur. Your discretion and insight saved this place from scandal beyond measure." Poirot inclined his head. "Your own restraint and integrity made my task possible, Colonel." Miss Cecilia, poised by a side table of rose-water sachets and fresh handkerchiefs, allowed herself a small, bittersweet smile. "I wish we might have resolved our misunderstandings without so much sorrow." Poirot's eyes softened. "Mademoiselle, sorrow is the twin of joy. One cannot know the sweetness of relief without tasting the bitterness of loss." As we climbed into the carriage, I observed the assembled household, each face etched with traces of the ordeal, yet uplifted by its closure. The butler, Mr. Brown, stood at rigid attention beside his housekeeper, Mrs. Farnsworth, their uniforms immaculate as ever. Edward Vale's seat in the service line remained conspicuously empty, a silent testament to the price of misplaced devotion. Poirot lifted his cane in a final salute to the assembled company. "Mise Amos, may Ashbourne Manor's halls echo once more with laughter, not whispered fears. Let this place remember not only the tragedy, but the compassion that followed." The carriage door closed, and the hooves of our horses clopped steadily along the gravel drive. As we passed the rose garden, its blooms now resplendent in full bloom, Poirot leaned forward, peering out the window. "Hastings," he said thoughtfully, "observe how the roses recover, even after the darkest night. Such is the nature of truth. Though obscured by deceit, once uncovered, it nourishes the soul like spring rain upon the earth." I nodded, watching Lady Winifred's figure recede a steadfast sentinel amid restored beauty. "It is remarkable, sir, how the smallest detail, a single footprint, a smear of ink, became the key to so much." Poirot tapped his temple gently. "Precisely. The heart may hide its secrets deeply, but the little gray cells never forget. Even the most elaborate misdirection leaves a trace. And when logic dances with compassion, justice finds its most graceful form. The countryside unfurled before us in rolling greens and golden fields." Poirot settled back, folding his hands over his waistcoat. "Our next case awaits, Hastings, but the lessons of Ashbourne Manor shall guide us forever. That kindness can be weaponized, envy masked as loyalty, and gratitude twisted by fear. Yet above all, that every act, no matter how dark, betrays itself in the end." I smiled, admiring his steady calm. "I look forward to the next adventure, sir." He glanced at me with the smallest of wry smiles. "Adventure, mon ami, is the spice of life. Without it, the world grows dull, and the little gray cells grow bored." As the carriage turned onto the main road, I reflected on the journey we had shared, a tapestry woven of clues, motives, and human frailty, resolved not by brute force, but by the delicate interplay of observation and empathy. And in that reflection, I understood that the true legacy of a detective like that of a great friend is not only the unveiling of mystery, but the restoration of hope. The gates of Ashbourne Manor closed behind us, and the path ahead stretched bright and unfurled ready for our next pursuit of justice, wherever the little gray cells might lead. Chapter 13. The Whisper of Tomorrow. The carriage rattled over the country road as the late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting golden patterns upon the seat in front of us. Monsieur Poirot stared thoughtfully into the distance, his little gray cells undoubtedly already at work, pondering future enigmas. I watched him, recalling the dramas we had left behind at Ashbourne Manor, tragedy and mercy entwined, secrets laid bare, and the fragile bonds of loyalty tested. Hastings, Poirot began softly. Ashbourne Manor taught us that even the most steadfast hearts can falter when fear overtakes gratitude. He paused, tapping his temple. Yet the same hearts, once guided by truth, can find redemption. This is the lesson we carry away. I nodded, thinking of Lady Winifred's calm dignity and Colonel Ashbourne's newfound humility. Indeed, sir, their strength in adversity was as remarkable as the deceit we unraveled. Poirot's mustaches twitched in a hint of approval. Precisely. And note, mon ami, how the sorrow of one becomes the compassion of many. The household came together to honor Leonard's memory, each soul offering what they could in remembrance. He smiled faintly. Such unity is the sweetest victory of justice. The carriage rounded a bend, revealing a small village nestled among rolling hills. Thatched roofs and tidy gardens spoke of quiet lives untouched by scandal. Yet I knew that, beneath even the most tranquil surface, human nature's mysteries waited to be discovered. Sir, I said, do you ever tire of pursuing the darker side of humanity? Poirot glanced at me, his eyes reflecting both warmth and resolve. Tiring, oui, but necessary. The world offers both light and shadow. Were I to ignore shadow, I would fail to protect the light. He leaned back, fingers steepled. But fear not, Hastings. Each case underscores that goodness prevails when we choose it. I smiled, comforted by his conviction. And what of Ashbourne Manor? I asked. Will its halls remain haunted by the past, or nourished by hope? Poirot's expression softened. Time, like the gardens there, will tend both memory and renewal. Lady Winifred's stewardship, guided by Leonard's wish, will plant new seeds of purpose, perhaps a refuge for those in need, rather than a battlefield of family intrigue. He tapped his cane lightly. Ashes to ashes, seeds to bloom. Carriage ahead carried a lonely traveler, a woman, in gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, pausing at a crossroads. Her carriage swung one way, toward the village green, the other, into the deeper countryside. She seemed uncertain, mirror of our own moment of decision as we left the manor's legacy behind. There, Poirot said, nodding, a soul at a crossroads, deciding which path to follow. Each of us stands at such crossroads daily. He watched the woman select her route, her horse's hooves echoing across the stones. May she choose wisely, guided by reason and compassion. I felt a familiar restlessness stir, the anticipation of another mystery unfolding, another tapestry to unravel. What comes next, sir? I asked. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, Hastings, that is the great delight of our profession. The whisper of tomorrow beckons with new puzzles. A missing heirloom in Paris, perhaps, or a vanished diplomat in Venice. He waved a hand gracefully. But each shall be met with the same methods: observation, logic, and humanity's finest compass, empathy. The carriage slowed as we approached a small staging inn. The driver pulled rein, and the hush of evening settled. Lanterns winked to life, and the air cooled. Poirot composed his coat and retrieved his notes, ready for our next destination. Before stepping down, he turned to me. Mon cher Hastings, let us remember Ashbourne Manor not only for its tragedy, but for its promise. That truth, once unearthed, becomes the seed of renewal. Carry that whisper with you always. I offered him my arm as we alighted. The scent of honeysuckle drifted on the breeze, mingling with the promise of our continuing journey. With each step toward the inn's warm light, I felt the comforting rhythm of purpose, to seek out mysteries, to restore order, and to honor justice with kindness. And as the carriage rolled away, leaving the crossroads behind, I understood that the greatest story is never truly finished. Each ending but a pause before the next opening, an invitation to follow the whisper of tomorrow, wherever it may lead. Chapter 14. The Lanterns. Warning, the common room of the Rose and Lantern Inn was warm with hearth smoke and the murmur of late supper. Oil lamps glowed in wrought iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across dark oak beams. Poirot and I settled at a corner table, beneath a faded tapestry depicting a stag's hunt, the scent of roasting pheasant drifting from the fian. Kitchen. Outside, the sky surrendered to violet dusk, and a few scattered stars emerged above the quiet village. Our host, a portly innkeeper named Mr. Thorne, bustled forward with steaming mugs of ale. "Welcome, gentlemen," he said, brushing flour from his apron. "Rooms are ready, and supper will be served in the hall shortly." He eyed Poirot's immaculate attire with respectful curiosity. "We do not often see detectives passing through these parts." Poirot smiled, fingers steepled. "Mon ami Hastings and I travel frequently on matters of importance. Tonight, we are but weary travelers seeking rest." He lifted his mug in. "Thanks. To rest and to the promise of a peaceful night." I nodded and raised my own glass. "And to good food." Yet even as I spoke, a chill fluttered at the back of my neck, as though the shadows in the tapestry had stirred. Poirot noticed my glance. "Hastings?" he inquired softly. "Nothing, sir, only admiring the inn's charm." I sipped my ale, but my eyes lingered on a corner where the lamp's glow faltered, revealing a darkened alcove. Before I could remark further, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Mr. Thorne glanced at the inn's clock, just past 8. "Strange," he muttered. "Who arrived so late?" He opened the door to admit a figure cloaked in a dusty traveling coat, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger paused in the doorway, surveying the room. Poirot set down his mug. "Might I inquire who seeks lodging at this hour?" He called across the hall. The figure's voice was low, clipped. "Hercule Poirot." A hush fell. Poirot inclined his head. "You have the right name, monsieur. I am he." The stranger advanced, boots clicking on the flagstones. In one pale hand they held an envelope, sealed with deep blue wax, impressed by a crest I did not recognize. The stranger offered it without a word. Poirot regarded the seal thoughtfully before breaking it with a flick of his penknife. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, edges finely trimmed. Poirot's brows arched as he read. I leaned forward, but the stranger, having delivered the letter, turned and vanished into the night, leaving a scrape of butyl against the threshold. The door clicked closed behind them. I folded my newspaper, voice hushed. "Sir, is that?" Poirot did not reply immediately. Instead, he smoothed the page with careful fingers. After a moment, he looked up, eyes alight. "Mon Dieu, Hastings this. Summons bears urgency." He tapped the text. "Meet me at dawn by the old lich gate. A matter of life and death." No signature. Just these words, written in swift, elegant script. Mr. Thorne hovered uncertainly. "Is everything all right, monsieur?" Poirot folded the letter and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket. "Perfectly, my friend. It appears an urgent inquiry awaits us." He turned to me. "Hastings, we must prepare to depart before sunrise. I suspect our restful night will be brief." A servant arrived with steaming platters of pheasant and root vegetables, but we scarcely touched the food. My mind raced. Who could have summoned Poirot here? What danger lurked by an abandoned lich-gate? In the gray pre-dawn? The stranger's haste and the anonymous note suggested urgency and peril. Poirot sipped his ale thoughtfully, then set the mug down firmly. The shadows lengthen, Hastings, and the game begins anew. He signaled to Mr. Thorne. Pray have the carriage ready at 5 o'clock. We leave at first light. Once the innkeeper had departed, Poirot leaned closer, voice low but intense. Observe, Hastings. The seal upon this envelope is unfamiliar. No crest matches any family I know. The script, however, is the work of someone well practiced in concealment, a professional hand. He tapped the parchment, and the phrase life and death, it evokes more than mere urgency. Something grave has occurred or is about to. I placed a hand on his arm. Then we must be ready. Dawn at the lich-gate may reveal our next mystery. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the amber light. Exactly. Let us take our rest, mon ami, for tomorrow we chase truth once more, guided by the lantern's warning and the promise of a new enigma. As the hall filled with the clatter of dishes and the mellow strains of a nearby cello, I felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, yet I knew that with Poirot's little gray cells at work, no secret, however fearsome, would remain hidden. And so, beneath the watchful lamps of the Rose and Lantern Inn, we prepared to greet the dawn and the mysteries it would bring. Chapter 15. Dawn at the lich-gate. The chill of early morning wrapped itself about us as the carriage ground to a halt before the ancient lich-gate that marked the boundary of St. Edric's churchyard. Pale mist drifted through the oaken arch, curling around weathered stones and the gnarled roots of yew trees. The church spire, black against the fading stars, seemed to lean toward us in expectation. I shivered despite my coat. Hastings, already alert, peered through the fog with narrowed eyes. Monsieur Poirot stepped from the carriage, cane in hand and mustaches bristling with purpose. He surveyed the scene. Dew-slick grass, iron rings for tethering horses now empty, and the rusted iron lantern still hanging from a crooked beam. Its glass was clouded, an unlit sentinel awaiting its keeper. Observe, Hastings, Poirot murmured. Not a soul in sight, yet our summons was urgent. Why choose this desolate spot at dawn? I followed his gaze to a solitary bench under the yew, its planks dark with age. Upon it lay a single black leather pouch, sealed with blue wax, the same hue as the envelope's crest. No sign of trap or tampering, but the pouch's weight seemed deliberate, purposeful. Poirot approached, and with a delicate flourish, broke the seal using his penknife. Out slid a slender ivory tube, etched with fine Celtic knotwork, wrapped in a scrap of parchment bearing a single line. Trust no one. The lantern will guide. The handwriting was crisp, precise, yet unfamiliar. Curious? Poirot mused. A message within a vessel like a message concealed in glass. He turned the tube in his gloved hand. At its end was a small wick, as though designed to burn within the inn's lantern, a literal guide through darkness. Footsteps whispered on the gravel behind us. We spun to see the carriage driver, lantern in hand, his face ashen. "Sir, I found this by the stable," he panted, extending another scrap of parchment. Poirot took it and read. He watches from the shadows. Beware his approach. The edges were singed, as if hurriedly torn from burning pages. Hastings glanced toward the churchyard, where branching gravestones emerged like silent witnesses. Who watches? And why warn us of someone we have yet to meet? Poirot studied the note, then pocketed it. A second messenger most theatrical. Our anonymous correspondent seeks to shape our steps, to shepherd us here under pretense of danger. He tapped the ivory tube. The instruction, trust no one, implies betrayal within our ranks, or that the very ground beneath the lich-gate is untrustworthy. The driver raised his lantern, its flicker revealing a figure at the far edge of the churchyard. A tall man in a long overcoat, hands thrust into pockets, standing motionless beside an ancient yew. Poirot's keen eyes lit at the sight. Their hour. Watcher. Before any of us could react, the stranger stepped forward, raising a hand to silence any greeting. His voice, low and urgent, carried across the dew. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I commend your punctuality. But time presses. The lantern must be lit to reveal what lies hidden in the nave. I exchanged a glance with Poirot. You know of the lantern, I said. You summoned us here. The stranger inclined his head. I serve the cause of truth, as do you. Yet one amongst you is not as they seem. He paused, and the morning breeze stirred his coat. If the beacon is not lit by the rightful hand, shadows will claim us all. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Who are you, monsieur, and what cause compels you to contrive these riddles? The stranger's eyes glinted beneath the hat's brim. All in good time. For now, light the lantern, and follow its flame into the church. There the next fragment of this story awaits one that may decide whether justice holds dominion, or darkness consumes. He stepped back into the gloom and vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving only the driver's lantern and the ivory tube at our feet. Hastings bent to inspect the pouch's lining. Poirot studied the stranger's footprints in the soft earth's mold, nimble, oddly reminiscent of the prints from Ashbourne's rose garden. Always another layer. Hastings, Poirot said, voice grave. Another invitation, another warning. Yet beneath every summons lies a choice, to follow the light or be left to stumble in shadows. I nodded, heart quickening. Then we shall light the lantern. Poirot extended his hand to the driver for a match. With a flint spark, the lantern's wick caught, casting a warm glow across weathered wood and ancient stone. Its light trembled upon the pouch's knotwork, upon our determined faces illuminating the path forward as the coffin-like doors of the lich gate creaked open. Poirot paused at the threshold. Come, Hastings. Our next revelation awaits within the nave's shadowed embrace, and may the lantern's flame guide us true. Together, we stepped beneath the arch, the lantern held high, our silhouettes merging with the morning mist. The mystery deepened, but so did our resolve, to unravel the next secret before the sun's full rise and before the darkness reclaimed its dominion. Chapter 16. Into the shadowed nave Monsieur Poirot raised the lantern high as we passed beneath. The ancient oak doors of St. Edric's Church, the iron hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was cool and still, laden with the scent of old stone and beeswax. Shafts of pale dawn light slipped through narrow lancet windows high above, but it was the lantern's warm glow that revealed the true contours of the nave. Rows of centuries-worn pews, a vaulted ceiling draped in shadows, and at the far end, the dark chancel arch framing an altar shrouded by a velvet pall. Observe, Poirot whispered, his voice hushed yet resonant, how this space demands respect. Each pillar, each carving, seems to guard its own secret. He tapped his cane on the flagstones. And beneath those stones, Hastings, lie generations of untold stories. Our mystery continues among these echoes. I followed his lead, stepping lightly to avoid disturbing the dust that lay thick on the floor. The ivory tube from the Lichgate pouch lay cradled in his other hand. He unscrewed one end to reveal the folded parchment within, then refolded it neatly and slipped it into his pocket. Patience, mon ami. The words shall come when their moment arrives. We advanced between the pews, lantern light dancing on. The carved bench ends each topped with symbols. A lion, a lamb, a pelican feeding her young. Poirot paused before the pelican, studying its beak with keen interest. Symbol of sacrifice, he murmured. Perhaps a hint to the nature of our next clue. He tapped the carving gently, then moved on. Halfway down the nave, a faint scraping sound echoed from the south aisle. Hastings, ever alert, raised the lantern toward a side chapel draped in crimson tapestry. The embroidered scene depicted a knight kneeling before a holy relic. At the chapel's threshold lay a single black glove, its fingers stiff, as though it had been cast aside in haste. Poirot knelt and examined the glove. Made of fine kid leather, Mon cher Hastings. A woman's glove, I believe. He turned it over, revealing a tiny silver clasp shaped like a teardrop. This, too, has been placed deliberately, an invitation or a warning. He slipped it into a small pouch within his coat. We must discover to whom this belonged. A gentle rustle drew our eyes upward to the pulpit, where the lectern Bible lay open at Psalm 43. The verse was illuminated by a single beam of morning light. Send out thy light and thy truth. Let them lead me. The phrase struck Poirot with palpable force. He descended the steps toward the altar, pausing to set the lantern upon a ledge. Its flame cast dancing patterns on the vaulted arch above. The words from both church and lich gate converge light and truth, guiding us through darkness. He laid a hand on the velvet pall, then drew it aside to reveal the carved stone altar beneath. Inscribed at its base were initials, R.A. Boldly, freshly chiseled, Hastings stepped forward, voice low. R.A., not a V, whose initials? Could these be? Poirot's eyes narrowed. An anagram? The order of letters reversed? Or perhaps a clue to someone other than our previous correspondence? He drew from his pocket the scrap from the inn, its instruction to beware the watcher. Our stranger warned us of one who watches from shadows. Could R.A. be this watcher's mark? He scanned the surrounding stone and noticed a narrow slot beneath the inscription, just wide enough for the ivory tube. With deliberate care, he slipped the tube into the slot. A soft click echoed, and the stone panel swung inward unhidden. Hinges, revealing a shallow recess. Within lay a small, leather-bound journal and a silver crucifix, its edges inlaid with cobalt enamel. Poirot retrieved the journal, flipping through pages cluttered with neat handwriting and occasional sketches, diagrams of the church, the lich gate, and beneath, coded symbols. Hastings peered over his shoulder, astonished. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. This is no idle hoax. It is the dossier of our anonymous correspondent, an archivist's secret record of places and signs. He tapped a passage dated 3 days prior. Identity almost secured. R.A. must not learn truth. He closed the journal with a snap. R.A. is indeed one of our suspects, or an alias for the watcher himself. Hastings frowned. But who? And why hide these in the church? Poirot pocketed the book and crucifix. Because a church is both sanctuary and stage. The guilty often seek absolution, yet they also exploit its solitude. He looked toward the side chapels. We must retrace our steps, examine those symbols and initials, compare them to what we know. As we turned to leave, the lantern's light flickered, revealing a faint smear of soot on the stone floor leading toward the vestry door. A final mark, a foot drawn in charcoal, its toes pointing inward. Poirot stooped to trace it. An unspoken message, enter through the vestry. He smiled thinly. The plot thickens, Hastings. Our chase of shadows becomes a journey through hidden corridors. We extinguished the lantern, relying on the soft, gray dawn seeping through the windows. Hand in hand, we followed the soot-streaked footprints toward the vestry door, each step drawing us deeper into the secret heart of the mystery. And with every creak of ancient timber, I felt the little gray cells sharpen, ready to pierce the veil that still concealed the watcher's identity and the truth that lay beyond. Chapter 17. The vestry's revelation. We paused at the heavy oak door of the vestry, the charcoal footprint from the nave etched before us like an invitation, no, a summons. Monsieur Poirot extinguished the last glimmer of the lantern's flame, and the church's pale dawn light became our sole guide. The hush inside St. Edric's was almost reverent. As though the stones themselves awaited our next move, Poirot pressed a cautious hand to the door's iron staple and pushed. It creaked on its ancient hinges, revealing a small room lined with priests' robes hanging in silent procession. A narrow wash basin stood to one side, its brass fixtures dulled by time. On a simple table beneath a stained glass window sat a worn leather satchel, its flap held closed by a single strap. Hastings let out a soft breath. Another pouch like the one at the lich gate. Poirot nodded, stepping inside. Yes, Hastings. Our mysterious courier favors dramatic gestures. But this time, they've left a package meant for us to discover. He unbuckled the strap and lifted the satchel's contents onto the table. A black serge clerical collar, a small vial of dark liquid sealed with wax, and a folded slip of parchment. Poirot unfolded the note first. The shepherd guards the flock. One lamb strays, seek the truth in his garment. The words twisted like a riddle, their meaning veiled. Poirot eyed the collar. A cleric's collar, yet our suspect is hardly a man of the cloth. He set it aside and examined the vial. The wax seal bore the same deep blue crest as the earlier envelope and pouch. Inside, the liquid shimmered with an ominous red hue resembling aged wine, though its scent was metallic. Poison? I ventured. Poirot sniffed the vial, mouth tightening. A draught potent enough to fell a man swiftly, and yet it remains untouched. He placed it next to the collar. Our courier challenges us to identify the shepherd, the one who watches over this flock, yet allows a lamb to stray. My mind raced. The vicar, perhaps? The parish priest is responsible for his congregation. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Or the bishop who presides over this deanery. One of them faltered aloud a secret to fester. He turned his gaze to the satchel's worn leather. And this instrument of concealment, the priest's portable case, implies that our mystery intersects with ecclesiastical trust. Picked up the collar and held it before the stained glass, its pale light illuminating the fabric's fine weave. Notice the flax used here, of high quality, imported from Lincolnshire. Only the senior clergy in this region would possess such a garment. He ran a fingertip along the seam. There is a small tear at the collar's back, hastily mended. I bent to inspect it, as if someone tried to conceal it quickly, perhaps in a struggle. Poirot folded the collar carefully and laid it in his coat pocket. Indeed. But for whom was this remedy intended? Whose identity did our anonymous correspondent wish us to assume before we uncovered their secret? He lifted the parchment once more, reading aloud the cryptic phrase again. The shepherd and the lamb who strays. He tapped the vial. A poisoned chalice intended for the one who misled, a test of loyalty, or a warning to those who transgress. He peered toward the robes hanging on hooks. Let us search for who among the clergy might wear this collar, or might have worn it in secret. We examined the walls, finding a hidden alcove behind a loose panel. Inside lay several bound volumes, meteorological records of the parish, registers of baptisms, weddings, funerals. One register, bearing the vicar's handwritten entries, contained marginal notes in a different hand, initials R.A., scrawled beside a particular baptism. Poirot's eyes flamed with sudden clarity. R.A. the very initials carved on. The altar, not the watcher's pseudonym, but the vicar's own signature, overwritten by our courier to draw attention here. He thumbed through the pages until he found the baptisms of the parish's most recent members. One entry dated only. 6 months ago recorded the baptism of a foundling child. Father unknown, mother deceased, initialed simply R.A. The following entry bore the note: to the one who guards the innocent, this testament of trust. Hastings whistled softly. A hidden ward of the church raised in secrecy by the vicar himself. Poirot nodded gravely. And that child's identity may explain Leonard Bedford's own secret heir, the beneficiary of his will. A parallel of guardianship. One shepherd caring for a lamb, the other choosing an unlikely heir. He closed the register and replaced it among the volumes. Our courier led us here to reveal a connection. The vicar, R.A., and our beneficiary, E.V., share a bond of guardianship. One secret begets another. He looked at me with intent. But which secret is the deeper betrayal? That of the will, or that of the church's trust? A sudden scraping at the vestry's outer door made us both start. Poirot's hand went to his coat. Be ready, Hastings. The next act draws near, and with it, the unveiling of truths that will challenge not only our logic, but our compassion. He lifted the vial and slid it into his waistcoat pocket. We have two mysteries entwined, the stolen inheritance and this clandestine guardianship, the lamb and the shepherd. One wrong move and poison, literal or figurative, will exact its toll. With measured calm, Poirot replaced the shelves and closed the vestry door behind us, leaving the chamber's secret sealed once more. Outside, the first rays of the sun pierced the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors upon the church floor, a kaleidoscope of truth emerging from the shadows. And so, with each revelation, we moved ever closer to the heart of this enigma, where justice awaited its final summons. Chapter 18. The final. Reveal Monsieur Poirot stood beneath the soaring chancel arch, the lantern's flame trembling like a heartbeat in the vaulted nave. Around him gathered the small circle of those with access to the vestry. The Rev. Rupert Althorpe, vicar of St. Edric's, Mr. Thorne, the innkeeper, the carriage driver, and Mr. Caldwell, the church verger, each summoned by the anonymous notes. And the promise of a dark secret. Poirot's gray eyes swept them all. Mise Amos, we have followed footprints, ciphered initials, and cryptic commands. We have found a clerical collar torn and mended, a vial of poison, and a hidden journal recording our every step. Now, at last, all threads converge upon one heart. He raised the charcoal-smudged footprint, comparing it to the shoes of the verger, Mr. Caldwell. The soles were narrow, the print's edges crisp. Caldwell shifted uneasily. I must have stepped in the hearth ashes, he stammered. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Indeed, yet you alone wear boots of this shape. He placed the footprint on the floor and tapped Caldwell's shoe. Exactament the same. Turning, Poirot held up the ivory tube. This wick was meant for the lantern, to guide us here. Inside lay the warning, trust no one. But the true purpose was darker, to isolate the vicar, to drive him into this empty church where he could be silenced. He lifted the vial. Poison intended not for me, but for the vicar, one lamb who strays, as the note said. The verger sought to remove his superior and seize control of the parish's funds. Caldwell's face paled. Thorne began to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. Silence. Next, the mended clerical collar, fine Lincolnshire linen, repaired with haste. You, Caldwell, borrowed the vicar's collar to mask yourself planning to enter the vestry and plant evidence against him. Caldwell swallowed. It was to frame him. He discovered my embezzlement of church donations. His voice cracked. I panicked. Poirot turned to the journal from the hidden recess. Pages of diagrams and notes, all in Caldwell's hand. Here, he said, your own script betrays you. Entries dated the night before, mapping the lich gate, the lantern's glass, and the vestry alcove. He pressed the book into Inspector Japp's hands. You'll find the proof you need. The Rev. Althorpe, who had retrieved the journal at Poirot's request, looked falteringly at Caldwell. My friend, he said quietly, you betrayed my trust and endangered my life. Caldwell sank into a kneeling posture. I was desperate. The vestry funds, I misused them, then hid the ledger. When you questioned me, I feared exposure. He bowed his head. I never meant to kill, only to scare. Inspector Japp stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Caldwell's shoulder. You will face the law for your crimes, sir. Caldwell offered no resistance. Poirot lowered his lantern. As darkness yields to dawn, so deceit collapses under truth. Light, this church a sanctuary, became a stage for your scheme. Yet each misstep left a trace. Ash on your boots, poison dropped in your haste, the watermark in your journal, disguised as scholarship. He turned to the Rev. Althorpe. Monsieur, Lab, your guardianship of the foundling child was pure of heart. But you feared you could not protect the boy once your funds vanished. So you summoned me here, hoping my little gray cells would discern the danger and safeguard your secret. Warg. The vicar nodded, relief softening his features. Poirot addressed the small assembly. Let this be a lesson. Even a shepherd may be betrayed by those closest to him. But mercy, guided by justice, mends what greed unravels. He handed the vial to Japp. Ensure this poison is discarded where it harms no living soul. Outside, the first rays of sunlight pierced the stained glass windows, scattering prisms of color across the stone floor. Poirot turned to me. Hastings, another mystery laid to rest, and another set of hearts restored by truth and compassion. I placed the lantern aside, watching as Japp led Caldwell away. The vicar closed the vestry door gently, the infant's ledger now safe in his hands. The church once more breathed with peace. Poirot offered a small bow to the Rev. Althorpe. Madame Lamb's welcome and your steadfast faith honored the best of humanity. The vicar's smile was weary, but grateful. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have saved more than a life, you have preserved hope. As we stepped into the morning light, I felt the familiar quiet joy that follows a case well solved. Poirot surveyed the churchyard one last time, mustaches gleaming. Let us depart, Hastings. The world awaits more secrets to uncover and hearts to heal. And so, with justice served and mercy extended, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings walked away from St. Edric's, another enigma resolved by the little gray cells, and another dawn touched by the lantern's guiding flame.